Welcome to the Perlo Podcast. We talk construction, its people, its challenges, its opportunities. We talk to industry and trade experts, movers and shakers, and people who get buildings built right. Join us, you won't regret it. Welcome to another episode of the Perlo Podcast. My name is Elissa Looney. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Perlo Construction. I'm here today with several of my colleagues. We're going to be spending some time talking about education in K-12 school settings. And these folks with me here tend to specialize in just that type of construction. I'd like to introduce Stephen Alger, Project Manager, John Tompkins, Superintendent, and Drew Carter, Senior Project Manager. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yep, thank you. Very excited.
So let's talk about construction in education settings. More specifically, we're going to talk about K-12 projects. These take place oftentimes in the summer when kids aren't in school, although many can't be completed in such a short time frame. I want to start with the projects that we tackle during the summer months. What are some of the factors that go into planning summer projects? Do you want to get us started with that, Drew?
Yeah, sure. So, during the shortened summer construction season, a lot of times we'll see remodel projects, and districts are often trying to kind of tackle some of the same items, whether or not it be a re-roof, siding repair, maybe a fluff and buff on the inside, kind of improve finishes. And obviously these are projects a lot of times that can't be done while students are in school. Campus is occupied. So, a lot of times the biggest consideration is just making sure that the work and the scope that's defined can be done in the time that's given on the contract drawings. You'll get the kids out of school and you only have, 8 to, maybe 12 weeks at the most to get these projects done. So, kind of the first item that always comes to mind is, do we have enough time to actually do the work on the plans? There's a lot that can get done in the summer months, but the more trades and the more people that you have on campus, the more difficult the challenge will be to actually complete the project. So checking lead times early on any long lead equipment, whether or not it's electrical gear or mechanical equipment, or maybe it's a specialty finish item that we're going to be switching out, making sure that we have enough time to actually receive that equipment, it's ordered on time and can get installed prior to the completion of the summer working period. One of the items, John, you and I have worked on projects together where just actually trying to get on campus early so that you're able to kind of look at the existing conditions and make sure that the construction documents that we've looked at actually line up with what's on the ground. Like some of the past examples, I don't know if you've got anything that you can talk about of.
I can probably come up with a couple. Like one big one is if they decide they want to do some polished concrete, getting that old carpet pulled up to identify any, odd floor conditions with the concrete. Most of these schools that we're remodeling were built back in the 70s and even earlier than that. So, taking that carpet off and looking at the condition of the concrete to determine whether or not it's a polishable, floor. That's a big one there, because the sooner you can get that stuff opened up, the sooner you can get the district involved to kind of take a look, see what they really have. Do they really want to polish this, or do they want to go back to maybe getting some carpet put back in there? And carpet's got a long lead time, so like Drew was saying, just identifying things like that early on is a huge bonus, and we do that on every project, not just with floors, but any structural issues or anything like that. It's just
The other item that I was kind of thinking about is like on a lot of times we'll do summer re-roof projects because obviously the weather's nicer and there's no students in the building. So if you've got a TPO roof and you have smelly construction methods that may disrupt the learning environment, you'll try and tackle that during the summer. So, lots of times when you pull off old siding, old roofing, you're going to find in the Northwest dry rot. So making sure that we've got materials on hand or we've got a plan to react quickly to that situation, by being familiar with what's in the contract documents and, what we may encounter kind of as a local item,
Yeah, we ran into that on one of our last projects where, we opened up the wall and discovered we had a huge siding issue, there were some structural issues, some weather-resistant barrier replacement, and it, luckily we did that investigative work to find that, because I think it was like $100,000 worth of extra work that we did there, and give or take.
And even just giving yourself a chance by maybe getting in at a spring break period and kind of taking a look at, hey, we may not be able to get everything off, but we can look at this spot on the roof that no one's going to see, and we'll be able to put back watertight before students come back, and just kind of take a look at existing conditions and start, whether or not it's buying additional materials or just even having a plan in place and knowing who to contact. Because the other item that comes up in schools is your suspect microbial growth, right?
Yeah.
You may find something in the wall that needs to be abated or, taken care of, and the earlier warning you have on that, the more likely your project's going to finish on time, even with a change condition.
Yeah.
Well, and I also, the one we did last summer is a perfect example of us getting in. I know COVID was a unique situation of not having students there, but look how much work we did during winter break and before the kids came back and it was the communication with the district of, we're going to do this amount of demo and we're going to safe it off and give it to the kids back in this condition so they can come back. But, that's the key is what you can get done ahead of time really helps. 1 week in advance is massive for a summer project when it's only 10 or 12 weeks long.
Yeah, given the subcontractors and actually giving the district a little bit of time to sort of understand what we've found, because these things don't get answered in a couple days or even a couple weeks. Sometimes it takes a month or two to get, a good answer, give them time to kind of cipher through what their choices are, So.
Well, we ran into it where we had old water leaks, and it was, there was evidence that there was water leaks, but we didn't know if they were fixed or not, so it gave us time too to find out whether they were truly fixed so that we could repair it with the right stuff, so it wasn't like, yeah, we fixed it, but it's not fixed all the way. So yeah. That was kind of that was an interesting one where we had, that growth there at McKinney, so.
Yeah, one of the cool things too, I thought, is there was a really good value engineering, I guess you could call it, because we, for that particular project, we were able to save them a lot of money from just not removing, some ductwork that they wanted to remove and replace.
Oh yeah, so. No, that job, given that we had so much, again, advanced time, we were able to do so much more on that. And the principal, she wanted a lot of additional things. She wanted the media center painted, for example, and that wasn't ever part of the plan. And because we had enough time, we were able to do that, which is shocking, and it changes the space. That's a whole new space.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
That's kind of the other, we'll see some mechanical upgrades. If you're doing a re-roof, a lot of times there'll be a mechanical portion tied with that. And the design teams, as they're putting together the project plans, they're going off as-built that they had previously in their site investigations, but that can all change when you peel back the walls or you get into hard lid ceilings that you might not have access to, and all of a sudden you've got to kind of react to these changed conditions, where ductwork's not run where it's supposed to be, circuits aren't where we thought they were. Maybe we had a facility staff that's really handy and they've been able to reroute a bunch of stuff, but nobody documented it, and now we're trying to react to that, and it can, especially with longer lead times, that can always be a challenge for like a summer remodel on a school site.
It sounds like for those summer projects, that pre-planning aspect, getting into the space to do selective demolition maybe is the key on a remodel to making sure we can get it all done in the summer time frame.
Yeah, I think, just that clear communication, with the design team, hey, being up front, like, hey, if we have an RFI, a lot of times there's language in the plans or the specifications that say, I've got 7 days to respond to this, or I've got 14 days to review a submittal, and just being honest with your design team and saying, hey, on a 8-week, 12-week remodel project, taking 2 of those, 8 weeks isn't going to work to review a submittal, and obviously we're trying to get our submittals in plenty in advance, but just having that open communication and letting the project partners know, like, hey, on this item, we can maybe wait a little bit longer, but on, this maybe we found some structural dry rot. We need to get an answer fast or we're going to have an issue at the end of the summer.
Well, let's shift gears then to occupied spaces. So those projects we just talked about are really focused more on summer breaks when there's way fewer students, staff on campus. What about when your project can't fit into a summer time frame and you're now remodeling a campus over the course of the school year? What changes about our strategies there? John, you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is safety, because when you're working around kids, there's nothing more precious than working around your kids and everybody else's kids. I mean, we know how to keep our workers safe, and we take it all serious, but when it comes to having kids in your work area, it takes it to a whole new level. So first and foremost, it's the kids, and then, understanding the program from the school aspect. What do they do on a daily basis? What do they do on an hourly basis? Knowing how you can navigate that building, the site, without interrupting the kids too much. I mean, kids are kids, they're gonna get into stuff, and they do all the time. And so one thing we have to do is just kind of help the staff and the students understand, hey, you can't go here, you can't go there by, maybe we build some special barricades, or we put up, identified pathways to keep them away from the construction. An interesting thing that we did, the project that we were just talking about, we ended up putting up some barricades to cover some demolition, and we used this material called core ply, and it's like a sign material. And so what we did is, the tail end of the summer, the staff came in, they're getting their offices set up, and they were able to make murals and stuff on the walls where the construction was. So when the kids came in, they're like, oh, hey, my teacher said, hey, welcome back, kids, and all this other stuff. And then as the project progressed and we were getting ready to, 2 weeks within pulling off the core ply, Stephen thought, well, maybe the kids can come around and make some pictures of their own. For each class could have a section. So it was kind of cool, and they took pictures of that. And, getting the buy-in from them, hey, we're going to be here doing construction, making it, I guess, less intimidating for them, but still with a serious approach to safety, Well,
and I think on that, it was very interesting to walk it, because what you think safe, it's okay, where can I put my finger into? What can I open up? What can I peel back? I mean, we brought Joe York in, and he picked it apart pretty well of we got to tape this, we got to do that, we can't leave this exposed. And it's things that you don't think about, because I don't, I'm not, but when you get a kid it's there, or you get somebody who's really interested, they start peeling stuff back. And I mean, what we did worked really well. We didn't have any kids try to peel anything back, and it lasted really well. And it was great for construction, because we were able to, it's essentially all taped together. We were able to peel it open up and do our work as needed at night when the kids weren't there. But yeah, I mean, the safety part is really the toughest aspect on an occupied site, of just trying to make sure that it accommodates the school and allows them to be operational. I mean, we worked around all their bus schedules. That when we were doing a project for Beaverton School District, trying to work through the hallways and trying to make sure that when we left at night, there was nothing left in the hallways for the daytime kids to mess with. And there's a constant shuffling battle with the district of trying to make sure that we're out of their way, but still getting our work done. And I think the safety is so paramount, and the communication with the school to explain what we're doing and how we're doing it and what we need from them and what they need from us is really critical. And that's probably one of the challenges we face with Occupied, is that we have so many stakeholders in it. The district wants this, we want that, the principal of the school wants that, the facilities guys wants another thing. So there's always a constant struggle and a back and forth, and it just really comes down to sitting down with the team and understanding what everybody needs and who's the right decision maker. I mean, that's the other piece, is who makes the final decision that says, yep, that's what we're going to do, and go with it. So every district's a little different. If you have a construction manager, or if it's a direct district employee, those all change everything. So it just depends on that. And I mean, to Drew's point, right, it's how big of a remodel is it, right? If it's just a fluff and buff, it's not usually that difficult. But if it's a major structural upgrade or a major swap of a school, there's a lot of coordination that goes into.
Yeah, and it's not an item that you can just get checked off at the beginning of a summer, the beginning of an occupied period, because everything changes, right? Like in construction, the only constant is change. And so, maybe your access plan at the beginning of the school year works well, but as you're, working through site work, you have to remove, fence or whatever. And now all of a sudden you got a spot for a runner to sneak through and get out, right? So you got to like make sure that, you're constantly communicating with, the users of the facility and letting them know what your plan is. I remember we were doing an addition a few summers ago, and it was not during summer, it was during spring. It was occupied site, and just all the different, activities that, we try and communicate through and set the expectation of like, hey, this is what we're going to be doing, and this is the potential noise, impacts, or this is, the visual impact that could distract your outdoor learning class that's right across the area. And, John, I remember you working with the principal all the time to try and, I think we moved concrete pours because there was a field day or a recital or something, and there was a noise component to it. And just, I think that constant effort of, realizing that, we have a job to do, and we're very task-oriented people, but at the same time recognizing that, that doesn't give us full access to maybe do everything that we'd want to do, because it is an educational environment and we have to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah, no matter what, the kids come first.
Yeah.
Reminds me of a story. I don't know if I'm telling too many stories, but at that school that we're talking about, they had a fire drill just like all the other occupied schools. And usually, you're like, oh, fire alarm's going off. What do we, what's going on? Like we must have hit something or broke something, but the kids are doing a fire drill. So inside the classrooms, this school had exterior doors that went out. So we put snow fence on the door and put caution tape up. And I went around and trained each teacher, like, we can't use these doors for exit. Your fire route is this. We made new fire routes. School helped us out, and they're all supposed to exit that way. Well, we had one teacher that was like, no. And the fire alarm went off, the drill, and she took the soft barricade we had out and went right through the door, right down to our construction site, and walked the kids straight across over to the fence, and then walked down the fence. And the kids are walking through mud, and it's not safe. We've got guys out there with equipment. Everybody just stopped, because we've talked about this in our safety meetings, and everybody knew what to do. They just kind of stopped and like watched the kids walk by. And so just interesting that, even after you tell them and you talk to them about, hey, this is not the safest way to go, they just kind of do their own thing every once in a while. So you got to be prepared for anything to happen in a school setting, especially an occupied school setting, Yeah, I thought I was pretty frustrated that day, but now looking back on it, I was kind of like, oh, all right.
Well, at least you'd plan for it, right? How traumatic could that have been for the kids if people started yelling or panicking or whatever, that they were out there? Yeah. Instead, they didn't know any different.
Right, yeah.
And I think the other hard challenge too is keeping the students and our construction workers separate from each other, because like we always, and that's something with the districts, they've always been very clear, is like the communication needs to come from the superintendent to the school, not through any of the students. And so that's always a challenge, because again, a student walks on the site and the first one that sees it, a foreman or another electrician, it's like, get off the site, and you're like, but I can't tell them to get off the site, but you got to keep them safe while you get somebody. So there's always a little like balancing act that we have to play with it, of like, we're not supposed to communicate with them, but we need to stop them and then get everybody safe again. So there's always a challenge with it. But I mean, you find a way. I mean, at McKinney, we dealt with it for, 6 months there, and it was fine. It was just, there's just little pieces, and it's, on top of just with the principal, it's like with the teachers. I mean, the gym teacher, he did gym outside while we were finishing up the gym building, while we were trying to get the last little pieces, while we let the floor cure out enough. And it was like, they want to get in, right? The teachers want in. They want in now. Like, give me my space back. And you're like, no, stay out. And so there's that battle too. You always face right at the end of the job too, of trying to like keep them out so you can finish everything before they move back in. And then punch list is always a challenge, just because students come back in and we're working through those. But yeah, it's safety is always a fun one to work through.
Yeah, the occupied part, and then you've got the summer part too, where everybody wants to use the baseball field, because baseball practice is starting about the time school gets out. And like, if the district closed down that field, then like they're not renting that field out to the baseball teams. So Now they're short some fields. So then what you have is people coming unannounced, jumping the fence or whatever, bringing their team in. I mean, I've been a baseball coach, so I know getting a field to practice on is pretty tough sometimes. So you just got to do what you got to do. So a lot of times you have that, or guys jumping the fence to go shoot hoops or whatever, and they're not really meaning any harm, but they're in a construction site. So I guess you could deal with it by telling them, to get out of there, or you could go over there nicely and try to, find a way to get them to go out on their own, Just depends, I guess.
Yeah, again, I just remember that we had another project where we were doing an addition to an existing covered play area. We were actually enclosing it for a weight room, and our site fence went around the corner, and I just remember recess would happen every day, and you talk about not communicating with the students. Well, that works great until their favorite kickball is inside the fence, right? And then you hear pleading, please get me the ball, and you're trying to focus on something, and finally you got to turn around and throw the ball back out of the fence and get them on, or I just remember the collection of kickballs and basketballs that
their favorite game turned into kick the ball over the fence to see if you can get that guy to go get your ball for you, and then you'd have 10 balls over there in one recess.
And just really persuasive little kids, please, you're ruining their 30 minutes of freedom by not kicking the ball back over. So
yeah,
probably they kept doing it because you were so easily trained to send it back.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Whatever the kids want, just give it to them.
We've talked a little bit about safety. We've talked about the kids involved. What makes construction in the K-12 space really different than a normal, say, private construction project?
So I think there's two parts to this. So part one, with public works, there's always a different contracting method. So there's either a hard bid, project where it's plans and specs, and it's what's there, you have it. If it's not there, you don't have it, versus a negotiated CMGC. And I think that's a big piece of the projects, because the CMGC stuff allows you to get early on and get involved way beyond, or way before the project starts, where a hard bid is very black and white. It's there, you have it. It's not, you don't. And so there's always a little bit of challenge there that you face. And the big piece with this is this isn't private money. This is public money. This is everybody's, tax dollars go to this. So you want to make sure that you're a good steward of that money as well. And so trying to make sure you maximize the construction budget really, is important to it. And so that's a challenge you face, that you're constantly, battling of how much money they have versus what they want. And I mean, on McKinney, where it was a CMGC job, I think we were able to give them a lot more than what they initially had thought they were going to get. I mean, we put a whole track around their field that they weren't planning on getting, because we were able to save some costs and we were able to plan up front. I mean, we really didn't have any major surprise on that job, minus a couple little ones when we opened up walls that we couldn't get to in time. But we had time to plan out a construction path. We had time to plan out a laydown yard. We had time to plan out everything, and we were able to do it. Versus a hard bid job, there's no time. It's you start, you go, and it's an adversary relationship between the contractor, the architect, and the owner, and you try to make a team, but you can't very well. And then I think the other challenge that faces them is, again, a budget deal with it is how much money they have. They don't have unlimited resources. So when you do find an issue, it's how do we make it the most cost-effective fix, or how do we make it the most cost-effective, solution, so that they can keep moving forward, because at some point there's more money. And when they don't, then you end up having to cut out scope that they wanted. So I think those are kind of the two main challenges you face with that stuff.
Yeah, I think too, just another item that I always, is school buildings, are getting so sophisticated and complex, right? So your bonds pass, and they have different bond objectives that the design and the projects need to, fulfill that requirement. A lot of these funding sources come with, hey, we, want energy efficient buildings, or we want, smart buildings. So just, all the different systems that'll go into a building, and making sure that everything, is tied into, maybe it's on a building management system. And so they can sit back at district headquarters and change the temperature, make sure that, each classroom comes with occupancy sensors, so lights don't stay on over Christmas break. Well, that has its own challenges, right? we've all heard the sad stories where the class rep tile doesn't make it over Christmas break because it was plugged into an occupancy sensor outlet and the heating lamp goes out, right? So it's, everyone comes back from the new year and, Larry the Lizard's gone or whatever it is. But, and then the other item is just the changing the different technologies that are used in different places, so it's not, I think back to my elementary experience and there was overhead projectors everywhere on, there was outlets had to be there and they had little carts that came and that's not a consideration anymore. John, you probably had chalkboard or whatever you had,
we barely had chalkboards back then. Yeah.
Now we don't have chalkboards, right? Yeah. John was stone and a chisel.
You still wrote stuff by hand?
Yeah.
But just thinking of like the front of the classroom and all the different, different districts, different age groups, they all do stuff different, but we want to kind of keep it standardized so that, they're flexible learning spaces, right? So maybe it's not the same teacher in the classroom every day and they need to know if I need to plug into a data outlet, it's going to be around this area or, whatever the requirement is of the teaching or, we have gone through this before where districts are getting, tablets and maybe they don't need as many outlets for computers, but they need, higher amperage outlets for a charging cart. And where do those get located and how often do you need those to make those useful spaces? I think those are just kind of some unique challenges, like with all the different, STEM programs that are available, there's also challenges there and opportunities to work through items.
Yeah, I always thought it was interesting too, the school hires so many of their own contractors as you're doing construction. Yeah. And so how that affects me is, well, we usually end up managing all their schedules, so they kind of work with ours, which is better for us anyway to do that. But at the end of the job, you might have 5 of your own permits that you need to make sure are closed out, but the school probably has 20 or so that are from 1990 or whatever, and you have to go through because now you're going to be held hostage by the city saying, hey, if you don't close all these out, you're not going to get your C of O. So then you got to get a hold of whoever to figure out, hey, do you remember this permit from 3 years ago? We need to find a way to close this out for the district, So, which you don't normally run it. You would never run into that with a private entity because they just would have to close it out,
Usually, yeah.
But it seems like, I've never ran into that, but it seems like with the school, it's like always like that.
That makes more sense because a lot of the work might be with one subcontractor, for instance, or sort of a private contractor versus a general contractor when they're tackling those small things. I did have to help a client close out some permits one time. It was not a school, but the contractor they'd hired to do their original build out wasn't so reputable as it turns out, and so we went in to fix some stuff, and one of the things I had to help her fix was closing out all their permits, which they had never done. Oh. So they'd been a little lucky that hadn't gotten caught before they fixed it.
Yeah, I mean, I know Hillsborough, they're big, Hillsborough School District, Beaverton's the same way, security right now is, one of the forefronts of items they're all trying to do, and so it's, secure vestibules, well, that requires power, it requires, security inputs and security companies come in and put in a whole system, and that there's a lot of little parts and pieces. I mean, we're dealing with it, or we dealt with it out at McKinney, at Beaverton School District, we dealt with it as well. I mean, they're going through it all, and so I think, like what Drew said with the bonds, there's different pieces that they want, but you really have to try and help them as much as you can, because I mean, out at McKinney, I mean, we fought with those guys time and time again. They kept opening up our ceilings that we had closed, and it was like, either tell us you're in there or don't, because if you're in there, we'll open it up so you don't damage anything, so we can have it as a finished product for the school when it's all said and done. So I think there is some challenges that follow that as well, and then the hard part is a lot of the schools, we hired them, they should be good to go, and it's like there's other pieces that you need to still make sure you have. So it's kind of that, and I think the custodians do, or I think they do sometimes more than they should. I mean, I think ours that we went through last summer was a perfect example of it, where he might do a little more than he should have done. And so we, like Drew said, we find some of that stuff when you open up walls, and it's like, why do we do that? Uh-oh, now we got to redo it. So there is some stuff like that we run into with, permits that should have been closed, or things that should have been permitted that weren't permitted.
Oh yeah.
So.
The DIY.
Oh yeah.
DIY work.
Or maybe they hire a contractor that doesn't really know how to, like, we're pretty thorough. I mean, we're very thorough. Perl, we don't cut any corners and everything gets done the right way every time. But when we come in and see somebody that's done, you can see it a mile away. Like, yeah, they didn't do that. No exit signs. No. So you're like, you must not have got a permit for this. Mm-hmm. So.
It feels like the districts have been really working hard to standardize their processes for construction, that it used to be maybe more acceptable to do the one-off stuff, but that they're working really hard to standardize things so you can have centralized technology, keep an eye on the whole building, and make sure that one remodel here will attach to the next remodel, which will attach to the next remodel, and make a little more sense. Does that seem right?
Yeah, and I mean, to kind of, to also be fair, a lot of these campuses are, the community is heavily involved in them, right? So, we've run into open permits before where concession stands that were put in by the baseball organization, someone ran power out there and the district may not have been aware of it, and like those are items where, there's a lot of different users of these facilities. There's a lot of people in and out, and like, it can happen, and it's just reacting to what has happened and try and keep, the project on track and get everything taken care of,
Always done with the best of intentions, though.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
And most of these districts have how many schools? Like Hillsborough District has 30-some schools.
Right, and I mean, they're all old. It's not, or not, I shouldn't say old, but there's a lot of these districts have very, have older buildings, and so they're constantly doing add-ons and additions and renovations, but they're not, it's not every year they do it. They do it once every 20 or 30 years, and so things have to last that long, or things haven't been done for 20 or 30 years. So what you find sometimes, you're like, that's an interesting way of doing it, but that was how it was done back, 25, 30 years ago.
I'm just thinking of a list of schools, and everyone has its little things. I mean, really tough to keep track of that. So to Alyssa's point, having a standard, and they do have the district standard, like following that is key, key for the district to kind of mop up all those old things.
I know that I have looked at school projects in the past and thought, well, there are ways to make this cost less, but they really have to think about quality because it does need to last that 20, 30 years. They don't have the budget to be going in and repairing things if they put in a subpar door frame and then you've got 100 kids banging into it every day. They don't have that budget or time to be dealing with those kinds of repairs. So there's a little more upfront money being spent to make sure that the materials going in are really quality, or else they're not gonna stand the test of 100 kids every day.
The other, I think on top of that, is the flexibility, right? Is like the building is going to be here, and maybe the methods or the thoughts are going to change, but we need to make these buildings as flexible as possible, So how many 90s schools have we seen where the concept was, the doors open up and you're into a hallway or a big, tall, open area, and you have access to the school coming through the front doors. Well, now, everything, we're trying to make it secure vestibules and, single point of entry, and just how those how flexibility and changing, times and what's going on can change the building's purpose. But, the building needs to be there and it needs to be functional through all the different changes.
Yeah.
I think the schools are often paying a lot of attention to new technology and new designs, and one of the unfortunate ones is paying attention to the designs for school shootings. You're starting to see more curved hallways and ways to make sure students can take cover and have locked spaces if they're needing to be secure, and it's a really unfortunate reality that that's kind of where schools are going, but that's part of what's being considered in today's world.
And it can really affect every trade on a project. I've seen your blinds are tied to the security system, so in the event that a panic button is hit, the blinds will come down on and limit visibility into classrooms or into the building itself.
Well, I think it's really interesting, like when you walk into the school that you just built, the new one up in Vancouver, and you walk into like Glencoe High School, There is one path in, and there is one path to the office, and that there's no workarounds. Glencoe, there's no workarounds. I mean, yeah, like a couple other schools, it's easy. You can get in, and as soon as you get through one door, you're in the whole rest of the school. It's very interesting when you walk into these newer schools and how much more they've taken, consideration. And I think there's also been a lot more consideration of classroom spaces and student to teacher ratios and student to space ratios. And so I think, and like you said, right, the flex space, there's a lot more need for flex space than what they originally were ever built for. I mean, we built how many walls? We built 4 or 5 classrooms in an old library essentially that act as different, spaces for teaching, and that's all flexible space. And that's one thing that, I think is a new hot thing, is a flexible space. I mean, even at the new school you built in Vancouver, there's a bunch of flex space that you can do different things in. And so I think that's a new trend right now for schools. I don't know if that trend will stay forever, but that's something that we're seeing with a lot of them, is we're opening up into bigger classrooms, into bigger spaces, but that have, ways to divide and, use the spaces as they need be, so.
So Stephen, you hit on this a little bit, and by the time this episode publishes, we will have published an episode talking about hard bid versus negotiating projects. School projects can use both methods. Let's talk a little bit more about the benefits and the challenges of that, whether you're hard bidding a project or you're in more on the front end for a CMGC project.
So I think, with the hard bid versus the CMGC, we at Perlo, we really encourage and enjoy the CMGC process more. That's our MO and that's our style of company. It allows, the CMGC allows you to have a much better team aspect. Everybody's on the same place. You have time to look at the projects up front. You have time to make sure all the parts and pieces are right. You have time to kind of help fix designs as need be as they're going in through permitting. Where hard bid is very black and white. You have it, you don't have it. It's a constant kind of battle between the contractors and that. And so, I think from a school's perspective and from a community's perspective, there is an advantage to hard bid from some aspects if it's a simple project. But when you get to these complicated ones, especially with occupied schools, CMGC is always a better path to go down, at least in my opinion of it, because you can have the time to meet with the school and understand what their needs are and what their challenges are that day. I mean, when we did one for Beaverton School District, we were able to go in and we sat down with them and to give us early access, we were able to go down and find what classrooms we could take and which ones we were allowed to get into. And that's the hard part that, with a hard bid, we wouldn't have had that, right? We would have said, this is what we're assuming we get, and if we don't get that, everything's a change order. Where this one, we were actually able to get more classrooms than we initially were told, but there was no change order. We were just able to adapt and change and use the space that they gave us. So that's one thing that I think is a huge advantage for CMGC. Also I think there's so much more benefit from a standpoint of we can help do value engineering way up front, and then through the process we have usually contingencies, and so we can take care of things that come up so that the school doesn't get blindsided by it, and then they have the money at the end to do the stuff they want to do and the fun stuff. I mean, from painting of ceilings to adding tracks to additional whiteboards and stuff that they didn't have originally, that just makes it better for them.
Yeah, I think it's just that communication piece is the major difference in my mind. Is like when you're looking at just drawings and specifications, it's really hard for the design team to put in all the variables, like on an occupied site, if it's a sequencing item, like how are we going, what is allowable, what's not going to be allowable, make sure that everyone's looking at it the same way. Whereas if you're involved early on and you're going to coordination meetings with the users and the design team and facility maintenance, you can hear what people's needs are, and you can hear what's important to the different stakeholders and who has, which, how are we going to all make this work so that school can go on uninterrupted, but we can still deliver a high quality project on time, and so I think, maybe, I don't know if like hard bid plans will start coming out with QBR codes with, video instruction or podcasts on it for whatever, but like, I think just trying to communicate only using, drawings and specifications, obviously it's been done for a long time, but I think there's just a lot more that you can get out of the process if everyone's able to kind of talk through items and have their own input.
And I also think quality, a CMGC project, the quality at the end of the day is better because it allows, there's time for the contractors to go through and vet out the subcontractors that are doing the work, versus a hard bid it's true low cost, gets it, and there's a certain level of quality, right? Even though what's industry standard, I mean, and I know this isn't self-storage stuff, but self-storage, industry standard, a baseball sized dent's acceptable. And it's like, how's that acceptable? But that's just an acceptable thing in self-storage. So in schools, it's not acceptable, but yeah, that's an acceptable drywall finish. That's an acceptable level 4 finish. And you're like, well, yeah, but that's really not an acceptable level 4 finish. And it's like, well, per, the ceiling and wall standards, that is. You're like, well, no, we want it to look better than that. And so that's the other piece too, when you get to the CMGC, is you have a chance to kind of vet out those subs, and your schedules aren't as cramped usually, so you can actually look at stuff and get the work done and fix any of the mistakes that may happen. Where a hard bid is, that's what you're getting. That's per spec. It meets spec. Sorry, district. And you see it when you walk into some of these buildings. You're like, oh my gosh, is this really acceptable? And it's like, yep, that's an acceptable thing, but it's not acceptable in my eyes, but it's acceptable in the eyes of the specs and in the eyes of the project. So,
I think, like, to your point too, it's all about the complexity. Like, I think everyone, there's always something that's straight down the middle, straightforward, not very complicated. And then I think, maybe hard bid is a very appropriate method because it is right there for you. But I think just with the complexity, a lot of times, with, the more challenges that you may have, or the more variables, like, I think that's where it starts kind of blurring the line about what is an easy decision to make, and, how are we going to move forward.
Well, and I think from a bond perspective in dollars and cents, I truly don't think a hard bid is more cost effective. Again, unless it is a very straightforward project. You are going to repaint the exterior of the building. Okay, straightforward, we can do that. But when you get into complexity in it, hard bid opens you up for so many change orders, and unfortunately, there is a portion of that game that can be played with, hard bid stuff, that change orders and to, make back cost on it, where versus a negotiated job, right, there's a buy-in from everybody, especially even from subs, because they get a chance to walk it, they get a chance to look at plans, they get a chance to do everything. So there's a lot more leg for us to stand on too, to fight back and say, no, that's not an acceptable change. You guys should have had that from day one. So I think that, there's always a mindset of, oh, it's cheaper, but I really don't think it is. I think if you did a true analysis of it, I think you'd find out that projects are either the same or that you're getting a much better value with a CMGC than you are with a hard bid.
I think too, like, the other aspect, I guess, is like, if you do go a CMGC model and you bring a contractor on early as design progresses, they can kind of help steer the ship on, like, hey, maybe we break this project up into several packages and we'll be able to get good value, but hey, we know we've got a really long lead time on our electrical gear. Let's get that out on the street. Let's really hone in on this electrical design, and maybe some of the simpler items on the back end, we can push and give the design team more time to focus on those items, because if you're doing a hard bid project, you get it all out at once, right? It's all got to go out because you need to know what the true low cost is. But if you're doing the CMGC, you can get out your long lead items or your early work packages that you need to get done, and then that extends the time that the design team has to get their documents prepared, and I think there's definitely advantage to that.
Especially in today's market, because lead times are astronomical at the moment.
Yeah, we've seen that in all sorts of different industries, and you've heard about global supply chain disruptions, and it's a very frustrating deal, but it's a fact of life right now. There's some items that you can't get for 16 to 30 weeks, and that's just the way it is, and we need to change the way that we buy stuff out to be prepared for that.
So collectively, you're the education experts. What do you wish people knew about construction in the education space that maybe they wouldn't think about?
Yeah, using expert kind of loosely there, but I think, I just think that, these are always complicated projects, and I think one of the items that's kind of unique about schools is a lot of times there's a lot of emotion with the projects. Communities have ties to these buildings, and you'll get the story of the person who's went to elementary school there and then worked for 30 years after there, and they've been in a building for 50 years. And so often what we deal with in construction is concrete, rebar, black and white, straightforward, but these are complex projects, and there's a lot of stakeholders in them, and like we talked about, these are not facilities that are built and then removed. These have to stand the test of time and work for the community for an extended period of time. And so I think it's just kind of overall it can be maybe a little bit more of a juggling act than your typical project, where maybe you're working for one owner and they know exactly what they want. Well, with a school, you're working for the students, and you're working for the staff, and you're working for the custodial staff, and you're working for the district, and and all these different people that have ties to that building. And I think a lot of times all those different stakeholders can derail a project and make it lag behind. So it's it's trying to make sure that everyone's heard, but being decisive and moving forward so that you can get the project done, because at the end of the day, school is going to start at the end of the summer. Like, they're coming back. So I think that's kind of a unique challenge, or unique aspect to K through 12.
What about you, John?
Well, to Drew's point, I think no matter what, the kids are coming back in September. So
or August,
depending what you're dealing with. But every school has its own recipe, I think. You can't just put recipe A to school B. I mean, you got to get in there and figure out how the school operates, and which is kind of unique to, like, it's not really like that on a regular private contract, but a school, it really does have its own recipe. And the sooner you get in there to figure out, like, you start with the neighborhood, knock on doors, put my business card on the neighbors' doors. Hey, if you see anything going on over here, give me a call. You start with those guys, and then you start getting to know the staff, and the principal and the custodian kind of starts with that. And then next thing you know, you're starting to get to know the kids, and it's different. You don't really get to do that with any other projects, because there's no kids around. Your kids are at home. they're at school or whatever, So I mean, a school project is unique just because you get to have all these new relationships with the staff in the school, and the neighbors too, even though you're not out there talking to them every day, but hey, there's old Bill, he's 80 years old, he used to be a brick mason, and he'll come over and tell you how to lay the brick, We call him...
I laid that brick right there.
Yeah, we call those guys the sidewalk superintendents, because they're out there running the job from the sidewalk. So you go out there and talk to those guys and listen to them and make them feel good, and then if they ever see anything going on the job site off hours, then you're the first one that gets a call, which is kind of nice to have your own little built-in security system with the neighbors,
So don't cause any trouble on these school projects. People are watching.
You'll have the whole neighborhood after you.
And you get it right to the district. I mean, if you make them happy, they'll be your friends. The second you piss them off, the second the district finds out, and you're going to hear about it. I mean, it's like flip of the switch. So it's always, I mean, we had delivery trucks that would sit there and idle all night long, and it was like, okay, guys, next time you can't do that. Go find the industrial park to sit and idle at, and we'll come back in the morning and we'll unload you. But you can't do it all night long. And so, I know we faced it a little bit at McKinney with those guys of deliveries coming in at 5 o'clock at night. It's like, we're gone. Like, job site's already shut down. And so, luckily I live close enough by. I mean, I went by a handful of times and told trucks to go leave, go somewhere else, and go find somewhere for the night and then come back. So, that's always one of those things. And I mean, the fun part with schools is they are usually a community center point. They're usually a focal point in the community, and so they're everybody's always paying attention to them. They're always very critical of what's going on there, and they always want to be a part of it. And I think a lot of it too, stems, there's so much buy-in. Everybody from, like Drew said, all the stakeholders, but even just end users of it that are, PTA that goes in, the parents that are in there, the kids, the after-school programs. I mean, at McKinney, they made sure we had volleyball courts in because they were going to have volleyball practice for the Hillsborough Parks there, and it's like, okay, like, yeah, we can do all that. That's fine, but it's those things we don't know until they tell us, and it's it's kind of always an evolving sequence through the process and trying to understand who all is involved with everything.
Well, thank you all for joining me today. I think this was very informative, and if to our listeners you have more questions for us about K through 12 projects, join us on our website, on any of our social media channels. We'd be happy to answer them for you. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Elissa.
Thank you, Elissa.
Thank you for joining us for the Perlo Podcast. Visit us online at perlo.biz. Subscribe to catch our future episodes, and join us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube to discuss all things construction. And finally, work hard, do what's right, and make it fun. Until next time.